conference will now be recorded.
Okay, we will begin the Building, Zoning, and Development Committee meeting at 7:15 p.m. Present are committee members Williamson, Limpert. Is he here? I don't see Mr. Limpert. He's here? Oh, there you are. I'm sorry. And Schuman, council members Broussard, Heeman, Glassburn, and Kelly, our council president, our planning and development director, our economic development manager, our safety service director, our HR director, and guests. On the agenda this evening is an economic development update. Who would like to take this first? Director Lieber or Mr. Myers?
Councilwoman Williamson, I'd like to defer to Mr. Myers as a continuation of the update when he was last before the BZD committee in February. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Kim. Good evening, everyone. This is an awkward way to meet, but I guess we're starting to get used to it. So I'll just start off. I think a lot of the requests that come in today came out of the news Channel 5 piece that was done last week. So I'll give a little context around that, and I think it'll sort of flow into the questions around the economic development update from a strategy perspective. So as many of you probably saw the news piece last week, we got a call, and I had some interaction with the reporter on questions around what's the impact on the pandemic with respect to retail in North Olmsted, and they were noting some of the closures. And he was asking questions regarding national and regional implications to closures associated with the pandemic. And so some of the, it's interesting when you watch a piece like that, it only captures a small snippet of responses that you give over, a half hour or 40-minute interview. So I wanted to provide some context around that. So one of the big things that we talked about, particularly with retail, so I'll start there since it was the focus of that particular piece, is the issues related to the pandemic certainly are severe, but you tend to see the severity impacting some of the smaller privately owned retail and consumer service businesses. As it relates to some of what was picked up in the news story, and I think it did pick this piece up, is the changing retail landscape, particularly with respect to some of the bigger boxes that we've seen close, whether it's the Toys R Us, the Babies R Us, Pier 1, right? Those we saw, and those were pre-pandemic. So we were working on strategies, and I talked about this, I think, a bit in February, where the strategy around that is starting to look at what's the retail landscape look like in the future? How is it changing? What's the mix of business type? And I touched a little bit about this in the article, and in the news piece. I think this is where I'm sort of most concerned that it took a little out of context. Is the question was asked, so what segments do you see that are still doing strong? And we talk about segments like discount retail. When I talk about discount retail, what I mean by that are places like TJ Maxx, Target, Walmart, Home Goods, HomeSense. Those are what are in that discount retail segment, and those tend to be still doing strong. And when we look at even in the current pandemic, the future of those tends to be, by all accounts, fairly strong going forward. So those are the types of retailers that we're talking about there. And we don't include, we currently don't have, all of those even in that list that I've mentioned. So there's opportunities to add to our mix of those types of retail store names. The other are what I'll term outlet stores and express stores. So things like, and these are smaller format stores of some of our larger retailers that you see. So those would include things like a Dick's Sporting Goods outlet, a Lowe's outlet, as an example. And these are much smaller format stores that are focusing on items of interest based on the market demographic that those stores are targeting. So there's opportunities in those segments as well. And I touched on some of that. The other is, food and furniture. Furniture obviously being larger items that are difficult to buy online. So that's really the focus in terms of, when I say focus, those are the segments in the retail market that are predicted, not just by me, but even nationally when we talk with our commercial retail brokers about those segments that are going to be looking to occupy additional square footage, both now and into the future. So from the retail perspective, that's where opportunities tend to lie. As you continue to look into the future, the pandemic, what it has shown is there's obviously going to be requirements for additional social distancing, other changes and implications with respect to how people are going to shop, wanting to shop more remotely, pickup service opportunities. So what we're tending to see in there is changes to what we call micro fulfillment centers. You're starting to see this particularly in grocery opportunities where you're fulfilling your order online, picking up, and I'm not talking just about Giant Eagle or Walmart, but there are some specialty formats that are looking at coming into different market segments, and that'll continue to evolve and to change. Nobody certainly has a crystal ball on what that looks like, but those micro fulfillment centers are things that are projected to come into the future. So we'll continue to look at those in terms of occupying square footage. The other opportunity, I think, and I talked about this, I think, quite a bit in February, that we're looking at is continuing to look at a mixed use. Right, so when you look at the total square footage of retail, we roughly, and I'll give it in sort of our core area. So from Columbia, if you start at Columbia and move west to Country Club, and even over to Dover, and then if you pick up sort of Lorraine to 480, that core, there's about 3.7 million square feet of retail in there. With the recent announcement with Sears and that, we have about, let me look, there's about 485,000 square feet of vacant space, and that includes some those that we already know. Again, that's including Sears, so that's about 13%. The one nice thing, and I talked about this, and it wasn't picked up in that news piece, is that I look at that, right? The changes that are happening in the marketplace, we certainly don't control, but what we can do is make sure that we're nimble and reacting to those. What I'll term, we have to look at them as opportunities. At least I do, in trying to target new uses, new formats. So some of the things that we were doing and have been doing long ago was trying to put ourselves in a position to be able to react effectively to that changing market dynamic. So the implementation of the TIF district, which we had set up years ago, allowed us the opportunity to start generating funds for infrastructure investment, and that's everything from making sure that we had proper lighting, meaning traffic signalization, lighting, signage, roadway improvements. So that is something that we saw we were going to need to continue to invest in to react to a changing market. We had revised our community reinvestment area program many years ago, again, to leave us the opportunity to try to incentivize certain retail segments which are allowed under that program. So this, again, it wasn't something, certainly the pandemic impacts were new to us, but that changing retail dynamic was one that we were planning on and planning for. So that's really what I wanted to kind of cover on the on the retail side of things. For us, our big focus has always been on making sure that we're doing our best to retain and grow the office segment. Our vacancy rates are extremely low on the office side, which is good and bad. Good that we're having that much success, but bad in the sense that it doesn't leave us a lot of excess square footage to attract new businesses, and then trying to make sure that we're getting formats on the office side to meet the needs of new demands. Now, what I will say is that what we don't know looking forward in the office market is many of you, like we're sitting at home doing this meeting, many people are working from home, right? That was something that we could never, well, I guess maybe some could have predicted, but most of us didn't predict this pandemic, and then understanding what the underlying issues might be, particularly with respect to remote work and remote learning and all those things that are going to continue to impact particularly how the office market unfolds. So for us, we'll continue to keep paying close attention to that. We'll work with our property owners, work with our companies to see what they're doing. I know in recent discussions with Moen, they still have a fair number of their employees that are working remotely outside of the call center and outside of some of the engineering and design folks who need to be working together in person. A good amount of them are working remotely. They were honest and said, we don't really know what that means for us over the next year, 2 years, 5 years in terms of how we manage our day-to-day workforce. One of the good things that the good news that came out of issues related to the pandemic is many of you are familiar with Commute Air and the project that we worked on several years ago to attract their regional headquarters and their operations center to North Olmsted's business part, or the North Olmsted Town Center offices over there. And recently, United decided to do some consolidation because of impacts related to the pandemic on air travel, and they were awarding a lot of the regional contracts to one particular contracting entity, and that entity was Commute Air. So that will have a very positive impact on their operations there, and we'll actually need to make sure that they're expanding operation capacity in their dispatching center and that sort of thing. So that's positive news. And the good thing is that just before the pandemic, we worked with them to consolidate them into offices on one floor where they were operating on 3 floors previously. So we were very fortunate that that project was done prior to the pandemic, and those efficiency gains were in place for them. So we'll continue to focus on that. Again, when you look at mixed use development, particularly in and around the mall area, and I talked about this in February as well, is we'll continue to target a mix of retail, housing, in some of that, the retail square footage that I talked about will likely be converted to other uses or will be demoed, for other adaptable uses. And I think it picked up in the piece, though it didn't pick up the context in that news piece, is I talked about some of these facilities will very well may not be retail facilities in the future. And what I was talking about was in that context. As we look to diversify the uses and target mixed uses, it's very likely that square footage that's currently retail will be converted to other types of uses. So, I think that's a pretty good snapshot of where we are today, how we're looking at things, and how we're certainly responding to things. And again, I just want to reiterate, certainly on the retail side of things, there were a lot of changes that were happening prior to the pandemic that we were well aware of and planning for. So with that, Kim, anything else that I missed or that you'd like me to cover with respect to strategy? And I guess I'll open it up for any questions at that point.
I think you touched on many of the tools that we looked at. You didn't directly mention, but you, I think, kind of sideways referenced our zoning update and how we're looking at kind of creating land use regulations that would support the kind of redevelopment that we were looking for. So, those have been in place, and we've lived with the new districts now for a couple of years. We're seeing where some of those changes really paid off, and we're also seeing where just some changes that we couldn't have foreseen, like the pandemic, still create challenge. So, it's always a constant reaction to the current state of the world. And we just continue to try and be flexible and keep open lines of communication with the business community, and respond to their inquiries and their needs as we can.
Thank you, Ms. Lever and Mr. Myers. I have a question in regard to the number of open storefronts we have right now. I mean, is there any incentive for businesses coming in to utilize these open spaces versus building new? And I know that Canes is the only one that's building right now, but is there any incentive to utilize these? I mean, we're coming to the point where almost that whole strip over where Bed Bath & Beyond is going to be vacant.
Sorry, I was trying to find. Yep, sorry, I was getting my mic off of mute. Yeah, I think to the question of incentives, I think that really becomes a project-specific question. And what I mean by that is if we were talking about a store that was just going to occupy existing space, there isn't a traditional, what I'll say traditional sort of a financial incentive where that's an abatement or anything like that that's in place. If they were creating significant payroll, although I think, we've excluded retail on that for our job creation grant program, there isn't sort of a traditional incentive, if you will. Now, where there is incentive, I guess, is when we start talking about reformatting. So a lot of what we talked about with prospective users is, again, reformat. So if there were a demolition of space, an addition of new space, and a new use, then certainly there are incentives there that we could look to from a tradition, whether that's financing or whether that's tax incentives. But unfortunately, retail's always been that segment, whether it's at the local level, regional level, or state level, where there aren't programs, traditional incentive programs put in place to assist a company that's just coming in to occupy existing square footage.
Are there any, okay, so let me ask this. We have a couple of vacant storefronts, and they have been vacant for a number of years. Is there anything that the city can do? I mean, these storefronts, they are not being used at all.
Well,
so
yeah, I'm sorry.
Go on, I'm sorry.
Well, I was going to say, in terms of reusing existing storefronts, particularly the one thing I think it's tough to remember about retail is very, very, market oriented and market serving. What I mean by that, it's serving, depending on what type of retail it is, it's serving household needs within a particular geographic distance of that, right? So the opportunity oftentimes in retail is not something that we can control. Because, right, it's that demographic that particular retail is trying to target. So what we have to do then is try to find other retailers that we don't have in the marketplace today that are trying to access that particular demographic. When it comes to reuse, again, oftentimes that comes to very specific property, right? So sometimes these properties have, functional challenges within them, whether that's older HVAC systems, format challenges based on the types of uses that are in demand right now. So I talked about the discount retailer, the outlet retailer. They're looking for square feet that are 30, 40, 50,000 square feet. They're looking to be in and around other retailers. So a lot of times of the ability to advance redevelopment in any particular property is going to depend on how that property fits with respect to those businesses that are interested in taking a look at our marketplace, right? So you can't, my point in that, I guess, is just to say that it's not as easy to just go in and say, well, we have, low cost financing that we can help you access, or there's a tax abatement or something like that. These are more structural changes in the market itself, depending on those types of users and depending on that particular facility itself.
So the question then becomes, are we looking at a mass exodus of our stores, especially our chain stores, our anchor stores at the mall? I mean, is this something that we should be anticipating?
Well, I think, I don't want to speak to any individual retailer, but I think what it is fair to say is, and we're already seeing this. So take, Sears as an example, right? Large format, traditional mall clothing stores, right? Though they're in a challenging time right now, where they have to start to look at how do they change the way that they're accessing the marketplace, because there's heavy competition for them for online sales and other formats. So, I can't answer the question. I can't answer the question about any particular retailer, right? Because unfortunately, none of us are inside of those and are part of the discussions with respect to how. But what we can do is look at certain industry trends. And is there additional challenges ahead for some of them? I'm sure there are. But does that mean we're going to see a mass exodus of them? No, I don't think so. Because obviously they're trying to make sure that their businesses can be viable and successful as well. And I think those that have remained around, to date, when you look at what's happened to JCPenney, Sears, those are old formats that really have struggled to change and meet current consumer demands. Those that are still remaining are working hard and have at least had the financial wherewithal to this point to maintain themselves and to look at changing their format to try to be successful in the future. Again, but what I'll say, is it going to look, 10 years from now, is the retail mix going to look the same? No, it's not going to look the same. And we don't know exactly what that's going to look like, because that's such an ongoing, evolving marketplace. There's no other industry right now that's sort of changing as rapidly as retail is. So, we'll continue to work with those formats as best we can to make sure that we're doing everything within our power to allow them to be as successful as they can be in North Olmsted.
And I appreciate that. But again, we're going into, it seems like all of our businesses anymore are dollar stores and mattress stores. And we have the vacant property where Payless is. The donut scene has been vacant for, I can't even remember how many years. What are we doing to try to get businesses into these? And I know that COVID has really stopped a lot, but again, these are storefronts that have been vacant for some time. And it concerns me that, this is where we are going to it. And that's what it appears to me. We're dollar stores and mattress stores and car dealers on the other end of town.
Well, particularly with respect to car dealers, I mean, those have had, at least from my perspective, continuing investment by those. I mean, they're providing, very good, strong quality jobs and tax base into the community. So I'm certainly not opposed to them when you're especially when you're building a strong market. But when you talk about, the Payless store as an example, again, that's where you're talking about functional obsolescence in the building itself. Mm-hmm. It's such a small footprint of a piece of property. It's an older store that you're going to have a very difficult time, and we've had a very difficult time sort of trying to find that particular retailer that wants that format. So where you are going to see redevelopment opportunity with those is going to have to be through the consolidation of multiple lots to allow then a redevelopment of not just that site, but sites around it. So for us, mm-hmm. we're continuing to market those opportunities into the real estate, right? We're constantly in touch with commercial brokers, with companies that represent companies that with individuals and companies that represent the types of industries that we were trying to attract into the community. and talking with them about that. But you're always at, those redevelopment sites are always at a competitive disadvantage for another site that currently meets that footprint need. So again, it sort of gets back to my point around, we're trying to find those that want to access our marketplace, that aren't here today, and that we can then, whether that's through the assemblage of multiple properties through redevelopment, or putting them into an existing square footage that we're trying to attract. Again, but you have to find that combination of having space that you can put together, whether that's assembling multiple properties or an individual property, with a company that is looking to get into that marketplace. And we're out in the community doing that on a regular basis, and trying to be as aggressive as we can in finding those opportunities.
Thank you. I'll open up the floor to committee members. Chuck, I can't see anyone because I had to go to my phone. So would you let me know who's raising hands?
Oh, yep, Councilman Limpert has his hand up.
Okay, Mr. Limpert.
Thanks. So I had a couple questions. One is on how does the revenue model change, or what are the implications to us as it relates to outlet stores and fulfillment centers versus retail center? Just how does that change to our what money we collect as it relates to sales on those items?
Well, when you talk about the discount formats, they're going to be very similar. Right, so the real estate taxes are going to be what they're based on, the square footage and the millage, right? So they're larger footprints. So we'll still be collecting, strong real estate tax. The valuation on those buildings isn't any less than what you would see with the mall property, as an example. Employment base in the discount centers is probably, as a number of employees per square foot, is going to be somewhat the same as traditional retail. As you start to get to micro and fulfillment centers, there's not a lot of them around at this point, that we're just starting to look at those. So the number of jobs in those are going to be quite a bit less on a per square foot basis than retail, because they're heavily automated. But what you will see is a higher volume of wages, right? The wage base for those employees, although the numbers are less, the wages are better. They're more traditional living wage jobs than traditional sort of a mix of part-time retail jobs. So they are a stronger employment base from that perspective. And from a valuation, I honestly, at this point, I can't speak to how those. My sense is that they would drive a higher real estate valuation, and very possibly a higher, corporate income tax contribution.
Thanks. And then a second question I had was related to the, we mentioned the work from home that's occurring due to COVID, and I understand that the state had provided an extension of the current model this year, though even though people are working from home, from a tax basis, they're still billing to their company of work. Is that supposed to continue in 2021, or are they going to change it back to? Have you heard anything about that, of whether that's going to continue that way, or whether now you're going to get tax based on your home of residence?
No, I haven't heard any long-term plans with respect to how the state's going to deal with that. Carrie may be because she's dealing with it on more of a direct basis than I am on day to day, and maybe she has some update on that. But I'm not aware of any discussions at this point as to changes to that into 2021. I think right now it's sort of a short-term reaction, and I think there's a lot of people sort of sitting around trying to figure out, what does that look like? What does that mean? And my hope is that the discussion around that is, how do we minimize the negative impact that could potentially have on income tax collections with those work cities? So, Carrie, do you have anything more on that?
Just that it was intended to be a temporary thing. Obviously, no one thought that this was going to be carrying on into future years, but there's a lawsuit against the city of Columbus right now. So they're collecting their taxes based on the physical address of where they normally work, and there are people that are suing. So as that evolves, I think that'll tell us. I mean, we may owe money back, but I feel like we're probably in a better situation because we probably had more people working from home than we do working at higher paying jobs outside. So I mean, I can't prove that, but I get a sense that we're not just a bedroom community or just a commercial community. So I think that we'll probably be okay. However, that legal battle comes out. But long term, I mean, I think that they're probably going to make changes. I have been listening to all this, but I think that, I think that retail has moved, the change in retail has moved aggressively during this COVID time, and I think it's moved up the mark of where they need to change. So I think that maybe it was 5 years out, it might be, 2 years out now. So I kind of think that it's going to move faster than we think, and not demise, but changing, just like Greg was saying, on how you do it. So, but as far as the income tax from people who are working, I think that that'll be decided in the courts.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Those were my questions. Thanks, Angela.
Mr. Schuman?
Councilman Schuman has.
Thank-
Greg, kind of piggybacking on what Councilwoman Williamson was talking about, there are there's quite a few vacant properties in town, freestanding buildings.
Paul, we can't hear you if you're talking.
Councilman, I apologize. I wasn't able to hear what you were saying.
Yeah, we still can't hear.
Yeah.
Ms. Williamson, can you hear him?
No.
Should we go outside of committee and come back to Paul? I can give him a call or something to see if it's fixed.
He can log in from his phone, or he can call in. Paul, can you hear us?
Is your phone muted by chance, Councilman Schuman?
Can't hear him. Okay. Well, we can wait, or we can.
I have a question. Carrie Kopfer has a question of Greg.
Gary Kopfer, but okay, go ahead.
When you said that the mall has, or not the mall, but our retail space has 13% vacancy, how does that compare to other retail areas in, say Ohio or Northeast Ohio or something like that?
Yeah, right now, Vacancies obviously are on the rise. So the most recent report that I looked at through a lot of the larger real estate firms like Colliers were second quarter reports that were, sort of, just finished. So they're fairly recent, and I think regionally, so the numbers, unfortunately, in the most recent reports weren't broken down. They were sort of aggregated for the greater Cleveland marketplace, and they were at 9%. And obviously that's going to vary locality to locality, but the greater Cleveland marketplace was at 9%. And the one thing, if we're waiting for the councilman to come back, if I could provide some fill commentary and sort of what I was talking about with reporters, that I take a positive outlook on it when I look, because I guess that's the only way that I feel that I can, not on the pandemic, but just in terms of what we as a community have to offer, whether it's the retail market, the office market, with 3 interchanges, strong regional access, a very strong housing market, strong average household incomes for the region, space available that's flexible for reuse. I think we're in a good position to react to changes in the marketplace, whatever those ultimately become. So, from that perspective, I think we're as well positioned as any community to address the changing commercial real estate market moving forward.
And I understand what you're saying as well, and I appreciate all of that. But you can understand our concern. I mean, I don't know, I'm sure my colleagues share the same concern. Is all of the open retail spaces, all of the open storefronts, and people ask what's going on with this property, and nothing, and I think having like the Payless area, we can go back to that. I understand that it's a very unique space, but we were also successful in getting the carpet store that was formerly at the corner of Lorraine and Dover turned into a Starbucks, and that's gone and reutilized into something better. I think that we're hopeful that something can happen, but again, that donut shop's horrible looking. I mean, and we're trying to pick up in places where we're coming into our city's gateways, and I hear that Levin's is closing again in November. So we're going to have that space open, and that won't be here either. So that's all I wanted to say. But I think, Paul, Are you back?
I am, yes.
Okay, go ahead with your question.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
So, so Greg, I apologize. My computer just told me it was overwhelmed. So, in communities that have a lot of vacant residential properties that are in bad repair, the action that they've been taking, City of Cleveland has been doing this. A lot of inner ring suburbs have been doing this, actually demolishing houses and combining lots, and to create opportunity for new development. And see it all the time. And of course, a lot of the times, most of the time, the house is in really bad repair to begin with. I mean, is this something that we as a city should be doing with some of these commercial properties that have outlived their usefulness? That the properties you guys are talking about right now just kind of fit that bill. That donut shop is impossible for anybody to actually use. There's no way to get a truck around behind it. There's no there's no access to it. It's a totally unusable property. Now I don't know that do we even have the power as a city to be able to condemn something like that? I mean, that's not usually how these things work. But I mean, moving forward, it would be less of an eyesore to be gone than it would be to be sitting there doing nothing. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I see Kim raising her hand, so I don't want to steal her thunder with respect to how do we deal with these. But I'll talk about it from which I'm going to tell you stuff you already know, right? But given unless a property comes into functional disrepair and then they're falling outside of and they're not in compliance with local code, I mean, I think that's where enforcement action can come into place. Some of the activity that you're talking about in some of the inner ring suburbs and some of the in Cleveland itself, in older neighborhoods, I think what you're seeing there again is properties that have fallen into disrepair. They've fallen into delinquency from a tax perspective or some other reason that they've then been able to be brought into the land bank. And one of the things, one of the tools that we didn't talk about was having the land bank available within North Olmsted, which we do. And I know Kim's very active with that. So to the extent that we can identify those properties, bring them in as commercial land bankable properties, that's certainly a very viable strategy to try to move some of those. But without having ownership of multiple parcels, obviously we can't consolidate those in advance and then start to market those. What I will say on that point, when we do is that in areas where we think that there is a viable set of properties that would be attractive for redevelopment, and I'm gonna give you one example, is off of Brook Park Extension, right? So the property where the it's Fogg owns the property, and I think Nissan was parking cars in there for quite a while. There's 2 or 3 lots, and those total I think about 9 or 10 acres through 2 owners. We market that as a potential development area on a regular basis. So when we're talking, we say, listen, I'm not just marketing one property that I know is for sale. I'm saying what you should think about is acquiring the property that is for sale and then look at consolidating these lots around it, because now you've got a very attractive development site. So from that perspective, we are doing that in areas that we think are strategic. But obviously it falls short of being able to physically consolidate those into a single parcel and or demolish outdated or dysfunctional buildings. So I guess with that, I'm turn it over to Kim, and hopefully I didn't mess you up at all.
Not at all. The city has been working with property owners and interested developers on a number of parcels, perhaps that just haven't come with a project to council just yet, but the Payless building, the Donut Connection, the Auto Loan Place, the Mr. Bubble or whatever it's called. Like, we've fielded numerous inquiries of those parcels over the years. The Payless, at one point, I think the owner maybe purchased a lot behind to the north that was commercially zoned as well to consolidate to make it more attractive for development. I know that they were doing some utility work on the site, I think last year, in preparation for some kind of a project that was never quite revealed and may have blocked the COVID-19 situation. So sometimes you don't necessarily know what might be happening in the background because we're having confidential conversations with developers about ideas that they have for properties. But all of those properties in that particular area and other areas in the city, there are, sometimes there's nibbles and sometimes there's bites and sometimes then there's a Starbucks, as Councilwoman Williams said, pointed out, at the corner of Dover and Lorraine. So, we have seen some action and conversation behind the scenes with those properties. It's not that there's been zero interest. I think just these developers are looking to overcome the challenges that Greg pointed out in relation to the building, the site, access, et cetera. So we continue to just work with them, try and assist through the red tape as best we can so that, if they can assemble the right project, that we can help it through the process easily. So I'd say that, probably more than council's aware that there have been conversations of a number of those types of parcels over the last year or so.
Thank you, Director. Are there any other questions from Mr. Glassburn?
Thank you, Chairwoman. I have a couple technical questions, and then I have some broader questions. On my parochial ward interest level, Mr. Myers referred to a area extending from Dover to Columbia as our retail core. Are we changing the definition of where we're focusing, or is that still limited to only Dover to Great Northern? And that's to whoever can answer.
I'll attempt. I'm not sure I fully understand your question. I think we're focused citywide. I was just referencing the statistic that I had thrown out of the 3,700,000 square feet for that particular area. Certainly, our focus is citywide. When we do development work, but that reference was just to give you a context of where that property number lied.
But in previous meetings, when we've talked about the focus of economic development efforts and funds, it was pretty clearly delineated as between Dover and Great Northern. Is that not the case anymore?
Sorry, I don't know that's ever been the case. I'm not sure what you were referencing in the past conversations, but we certainly, focus our efforts citywide. That area just happens to be the largest concentration of economic activity, so it drives a lot of the work that we do, but not at the exclusion of other areas of the city.
Okay, I guess we'll have to check the previous meetings to verify that. I guess the next question I would have, Madam Chairwoman, if I may continue, is the 13% vacancy rate. To my recollection, the last 6 months ago, we were talking about either a 6 or 7% vacancy rate. But that 13% rate, that doesn't yet include a Sears or the nationally bankrupting JCPenney or Levin's leaving, or businesses like Chuck E. Cheese, which fundamentally can't exist in the pandemic. Where are we at if those four or others that are telegraphing that they are going out of business, where will that put us at percentage-wise of vacancy?
Well, that number does include Sears, which is the largest square footage at about 200,000 square feet. They're just under 200,000 square feet. The others, it does not. The others you listed, it does not include that. And off the top of my head, I don't know the square footages for each of those, but just thinking around, it probably pushes that number a couple of percent higher. I don't know that it moves it. Probably to 15%, 16%. I don't know those particular properties off the top of my head, their exact square footages, but knowing them, just from driving by, I don't think it would push it more than a couple of additional percentage points.
Madam Chairwoman, I'll yield at any time if anyone else has questions. I guess the next I would ask is, we talked a lot about retail, but there are other businesses that are struggling, such as restaurants and other, not just the grocery store. There's others besides just what we conventionally think of as retail and office that have, whether it's services or elsewise. Councilwoman Heeman has tried to create some relief to businesses, specifically the restaurants, and letting them have more space of their vacant neighbors. I've heard of other cities doing direct aid or grants to businesses. What other tools are we utilizing besides marketing properties, or are the same tools that we've had for prior to COVID?
Well, I think part of what we've tried to do is make sure that we've been communicating with local businesses around various programs. So the PPP program that came out of the CARES Act, making sure that, and again, working with local bankers, making sure that we were promoting that program locally to small businesses that qualified for that, and others. I agree. I have heard of some other communities establishing local grant programs. And again, that's a function of the fiscal situation within those communities. You know, I have not had direct conversations here with any of the leadership at the city about whether or not we should be looking at that. I think many of those programs are smaller, and they might provide some smaller temporary relief. I don't think they you know, necessarily change the functional challenges that are being faced within certain industry segments. So for us, it's a matter of making sure that we're putting those small business owners in touch with resource providers, you know, like the local banks that could help them administer a PPP program, or like the small business development centers who could help them with you know, budgeting and financial management, those types of things. So we've tried to make sure that we keep I know Kim has done, and we've provided information with respect to listing those available resources on the website, as well as push them out through the mayor's monthly newsletter.
Madam Chairwoman, I'll close with a statement and question all in one. I see this as the future of retail and how we handle this situation as a more, I guess, urgent matter. We've had, as the chairwoman has stated, you know, the small stores on Lorraine and the Strip starting to fail in one after another. We're having large anchor tenants now leaving the mall. You know, we've seen other cities go in different directions, like Westlake with open air, like Crocker Park, or the complete reinvention of itself with Parmatown. I guess I'm looking for a larger future plan. I don't think we can just afford to wait for properties to go into tax foreclosure for us to change that dated retail that was referred to. So I'm hoping, whether it's along the lines of what Councilman Schuman was describing, whether either we intervene in the demolition or rehabilitation of properties, or we have a different, broader vision like other communities have had in terms of developing. I don't think a wait and see rezoning and hoping the market will jump into it is going to get us through this. And so I'm just hopeful that we're going to hear a broader and more detailed vision along a specific timeline over the next few years, because these, as has been mentioned, were long-term trends that have been severely exacerbated. And even when the economy returns, things aren't going to be the same. And so I don't think Penny's and Sears will be back when COVID is cured. So if there's anything about a broader vision or future as to how we're going to do things, where you'd like to comment, I would love to hear it. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just sort of reiterate some of the things I'd stated previously, which is, you know, we're certainly not sitting waiting for whatever happens to happen. Part of the ability to be able to do some of the things that you mentioned, whether it was, you know, whether it's retooling existing retail, identifying new market opportunities, requires us to sort of take some steps in advance, which we were doing with the zoning code changes, which we were doing with the implementation of the TIF district to make sure that we had infrastructure funds available, which we have been doing in meeting and talking with our private property owners about redevelopment strategies for their property. You know, the unfortunate challenge is that oftentimes, you know, we don't control those properties, as we talked about. So we're meeting with them, talking about redevelopment opportunities, promoting the consolidation of properties for adaptive reuse. Again, one, it's not in that core, but one that's an adaptive. So the Omni senior living project, as an example, I mean, that was taking a property, again, that the nursery was a dying business. They consolidated those properties and found a new, better current use. That I just use that as an example of we're engaged with the development community around those types of opportunities throughout the city where they make sense based on the type of investment opportunities that are available going forward. It's not sort of this wait and see approach. You know, we're talking with the developers who are developing these micro fulfillment centers in other areas. They're not here in the Cleveland market yet. So we're out talking about who's working on those in the country, right? Who owns property here? Are you interested in making an investment in North Olmsted, right? So we are out in the marketplace doing that, talking about, you know, these opportunities that I talked about in the future, like micro fulfillment centers, like, you know, medical facility investments. I mean, we're in the marketplace talking to them. So we're not waiting for the phone to ring with respect to these future opportunities. And we're doing certainly everything within our power to make sure that you know, we're communicating opportunities within the marketplace, putting ourselves in front of those people can help drive redevelopment and reinvestment in those properties.
Councilwoman Williamson, are you back on?
I am.
Councilwoman Heeman has her hand raised.
Thank you. Councilwoman?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Maris, I guess a couple of things I'd like to find out. I know that you're not, you know, full-time employed with us, but so when you talk about reaching out and doing these things and you're, you know, what exactly is it you're doing? You're reaching out to realtors once a week, once a month, you go network with who? Like what exactly are you, when you say marketing, you know, could you like detail that a little bit for us? And how often do you do this on behalf of North Olmsted? And it's a difficult market out there, I understand. And I do understand the changes in all of the retail, but to Councilman Glassburn's point, and Chairperson Williams' point, I myself, for example, looked at space in North Olmsted for a small business. I talked to Director Lieber about it 2 years ago. I haven't heard a word since. When I went and looked out on my own, even for a little small business that I was interested in opening, parking, the little strip plazas couldn't even accommodate the parking that it would take for particular types of businesses. So are the, I guess, detail for me if you can, please, you know, what techniques and what do you do to market and network North Olmsted for us and how often? And secondly, then what is the feedback then from the plaza owners? Obviously, they're not collecting rent. I mean, are they sitting on paid off properties that they have no need for income because they seem interested when I talk to them, but then they didn't have anywhere to go with being able to, oh, maybe we can do something about parking, or maybe, meanwhile, the whole plaza is empty, but they are only designated X number of spaces, which wouldn't accommodate the business. So those couple questions, you can answer them one at a time in whatever order you're comfortable. Thank you.
Sure, Madam Councilwoman. I think in terms of timing, you know, we do it on, and I'm engaged on a monthly basis. And the amount of time varies month to month. So I'm engaged on a regular monthly basis. In terms of where we go and how we reach out and detailing some of the strategies that we're talking about. So what we'll do is we'll put together like a marketing profile, a single sheet of property, and we'll outline that property, and I'll reach out to folks in the commercial real estate market that I know sort of represent companies that invest in the types of uses that we may want to target for that property, and that property would be conducive to support. So we would put together a one-page material. You know, here's the property that we're talking about. Here's some information around the demographics around that. You know, providing that information. It might be in a one-page sheet. It might be in the form of an email. A lot of what we're doing is, you know, I'm communicating with people that I've interacted with for years, and and provide them, say, hey, I know that you're interested in the market, or I heard this property is coming in the market. Is this a property that would fit for a project that I'm familiar that you did in another community? And I'll say this type of redevelopment would be something that would be attractive, I think, for this particular property, and we'll engage in direct conversation. So it runs the gamut of sending out something that's a little bit more formal in a write-up, a specific, like a one-page marketing sheet, to just, again, reaching out and saying, hey, I saw that you made this investment. And when I say you, I'm talking to a particular type of a real estate investment company, and saying, that type of use would be very interesting to us in North Olmsted. What do you think about that as a use here? And start to engage in dialogue around.
What generally then is their response? So for example, we don't have a high-end enough market for them. We have too many vacant spaces. Clearly one of the reasons that I chose to move to North Olmsted is, seriously, it's 12 miles from downtown. We're on top of an airport, the interchanges, all of these things that you have mentioned are attractive. So why aren't they biting? What do you think is the true issue? And there could be more than one, obviously, but what do you think is the reason there is not a favorable response when you reach out?
Well, I don't know that there's not a favorable response. I mean, we've certainly seen some successes with projects that we talked about, like Commute Air and others, on the office sector. On the retail in particular, again, it's really a matter of timing and finding the right party that's interested in undertaking a project that has the capital wherewithal, because they're not tied up in other projects, either locally, statewide or nationally, and that has an interest in executing on something like that. So the answer, there's never a single answer where they come back and say, well, I'm not interested for this reason or that reason. Oftentimes it comes down to the complexity of trying to put together multiple parcels to put together a deal. Even the small Starbucks project, it takes a lot of resources with respect to just consolidating a couple of properties together, and then getting the existing property owners interested and engaged.
I worked on the finance for Crocker Park, so I understand all the partners that it takes, and they're usually not commercial real estate agents. They are usually business lawyers. They are usually real estate developers. So only those commercial real estate agents are in a retail market, and the rest of them are being funded by like the state teachers funding, for example. They put up dollars like that, dollars from all kinds of multi-layers of financing. I've seen 15 layers of financing in deals. The Port Authority is a big financer of projects like the type that Mr. Glassburn is talking about. So I am asking you, how do you reach out to those people? What are you connected to them? Because obviously the commercial Colliers and those people of the world are really only looking for their clients in retail environments. They're not the deal makers. So how do we reach that market for us?
Well, yeah,
an outdoor property like Crocker, or like the new one on the east side. Like how do we do those things, Mr. Myers?
Right. So when I talk about the real estate community, I'm not talking just specifically about commercial brokers. I mentioned Colliers because I was referencing their market report. So I'll reach out to folks from the Jacobs Group, First Interstate Properties. These are developers that are local, that do projects locally, regionally, nationally. So those are examples. When I refer to the real estate market, I'm making a general reference to both commercial brokers, developers, others that I know, right? So you'd mentioned attorneys. Attorneys and accountants are great contacts because oftentimes they're the first touches with companies that are looking for opportunities, and we'll meet with them on a regular basis as well. So when I talk about the real estate community, I'm making a very broad reference that includes developers and and others, like you mentioned, attorneys or accountants even.
Well, I'm only suggesting it because obviously, you know, I have, my career was, you know, as a paralegal, and I did a lot of banking and finance transactions, real estate transactions, and Chapter 11 work. So it all kind of rolls in together, but you have to be connected to some of those, you know, those funders, financiers. And I was just interested in how is it you approach that? And how do you do that? So I think I'm finished. Thank you.
Okay, I think we have gone far beyond our meeting time. So I would say if there's any other questions from council, if you could email them to Chuck, and then he can send them to Director Lieber and Mr. Myers, and then perhaps we can get them answered that way. Is there anyone opposed? Is the committee opposed to that? Mr. Limpert, Mr. Schuman?
That sounds great to me. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay.
That
Okay.
sounds good.
Okay.
I agree.
Then I'm going to conclude the meeting at 8:21 p.m. I thank you all for this discussion and everyone for your questions. And Mr. Myers, thank you for being patient.
No, no problem. Thanks for having me.
Okay. Thank you.